So now let's look at the rushing totals. So for the Eagles, obviously, we have a new record that was set just this past season by Saquon Barkley. Broke LeSean McCoy's record. Welcome to Just the Stats NFL, the show that covers the NFL statistical leaders from the all-time greats to the current players leading the NFL. I'm Ernie Jennings, your host. Welcome back to this episode, where we begin with the NFC. I finished the entire AFC. Every team in the AFC is done. So now we turn our attention to the NFC. If you're interested in the AFC teams, you can go back to previous podcasts and hear about those. So if you have been listening to these podcasts, you'll know I have just started mixing in podcasts that cover other aspects of the statistics in the NFL other than just the teams themselves. And with 60 plus days before the season starts, somewhere around there, I shouldn't have any problem getting through all 16 teams that are left from the NFC. So that shouldn't be a problem at all. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do this episode on the Philadelphia Eagles. It seems fitting. I'd started this whole series on the teams, each team individually, by starting with the AFC East. So now I'm going to do the NFC East. And as I said, it seems fitting because I will start with the first place team from the NFC East, which was the Philadelphia Eagles, the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. So it seems appropriate that I should start with them. I actually saved the NFC for last because I'm fascinated by more teams from the NFC that have long histories and some of the records that might have been around longer than, say, 1960 or where most of the teams in the AFC started much later than the NFC teams. So not all of them necessarily, but that's the general rule. So I wanted to save the NFC for second. All right, so let's get going with this episode. So in 2024, the Eagles finished first in the NFC East with a record of 14 wins and 3 losses. At home, they were 8-2. On the road, 6-2. And in their division, they were 5-1. So how do the Eagle players of 2024 stand in relation to the greatest Eagle players of all time, as well as the greatest players of all time in the NFL? That's what we'll find out right now in this episode of Just the Stats NFL. So as always, we will start with the coaches. This is kind of interesting right off the bat. The winningest coach for the Philadelphia Eagles is Andy Reid. From 1999 to 2012, 130 wins for Andy Reid. What's interesting about that is Andy Reid is also the winningest coach for the Kansas City Chiefs with 143 wins. No other coach has the most victories for that team on 2 different teams. So Andy Reid currently is 4th all-time in wins, and he won't move to 3rd this season, and probably not even next. He needs 29, basically 30 wins to pass Bill Belichick for 3rd. So he's got a little ways to go. But, he keeps racking up 13, 14 wins, obviously now for Kansas City. But that's somewhere he's moving up as far as Kansas City. And as far as the all-time record, like I said, 130 of his wins, which currently is 273, 130 of them come with the Philadelphia Eagles. Nick Sirianni is 4th currently with 48. And he shouldn't have any problem passing Dick Vermeil for 3rd. Dick Vermeil from 1976 to 1982 had 54 wins. So Nick Sirianni only needs 7 wins, and he'll pass Dick Vermeil. And then next in second is Greasy Neal, who had 63 wins. That'll be unlikely, not impossible, because Philadelphia does have a very good team, but he'd have to have 15 wins to tie. So not out of the realm of possibility, obviously, but we'll see. And then obviously after moving into second, it'll be quite a while before he has a chance to pass Andy Reid as far as coaching goes. All right. Let's look at the all-time players as far as the offense go. And we'll start with the quarterbacks and look at some of the passing records for the Eagles. So the all-time leader for the Eagles is Donovan McNabb. From 1999 to 2009, he racked up 32,873 yards passing. Ron Jaworski's second with 26,963. Those are your top two currently. Jalen Hurts is sixth right now with 14,667. He should have no problem, unless he gets hurt, obviously, to move into fourth, where Carson Wentz is currently fourth with only 16,811. So Jalen Hurts only needs a little over 2,000 yards this season to move into fourth. He won't catch Randall Cunningham, who's third with 22,877. That'll take a couple seasons. Even at 4,000 a season, he would barely reach it. So probably the beginning of the third season from now, counting the 2025 season, Jalen Hurts could move into third. And as long as he stays with the team, and he has a definite possibility that he could ultimately be the leading passer for the Eagles. So we'll see. We'll be able to watch him pass Norm Snead and Carson Wentz at least this season. So that's good. Now that's the passing yards. When we're looking at touchdowns, again, Donovan McNabb has 216 touchdown passes. Ron Jaworski's second with 175. Jalen Hurts currently is seventh with 85. Obviously, you think he'd have more, but he runs in as many. It seems like, he has a lot more touchdowns probably rushing than most quarterbacks do. But currently, he's seventh. Only needs 5 to move into sixth. I don't know if he'll get past that. Well, he could. Norm Snead has 111. He's in fifth. And Carson Wentz has 113 for fourth. So it's a possibility if he throws about 29 touchdown passes, he could move all the way into fourth. But he won't catch third for a couple of years because Randall Cunningham has 150 for third place. So it'll be a little while, a couple seasons before Jalen Hurts moves up into third. But again, 216 touchdown passes is definitely a number that can be reached. Now, when it comes to interceptions, Ron Jaworski is all-time leader. He played from 1977 to 1986. He had 151 interceptions that he's thrown. Norm Snead was second with 124. He played way back in 1964 to 1970. That was the top interception leaders, top two. When it comes to Jalen Hurts, he's way down at 13th with only 39. And I don't see him even catching Ron Jaworski necessarily. He'd have to play many, many years. And I say that because Ron Jaworski threw, which isn't even a bad number, but he threw an interception at 3.9% rate, whereas Jalen Hurts is throwing interception at only 2% rate, basically half of what Ron Jaworski's been doing. So I don't see him actually, even though he might catch a lot of the other records, which are good records, he won't catch the negative record of interceptions. I doubt it anyway. Now, when it comes to being sacked, that's where Randall Cunningham tops the list with 422 times he was sacked while playing for the Eagles let me look at that real quick. 422 times from 1985 to 1995. led the team there. Donovan McNabb was second. You notice both of these guys are more active running quarterbacks. 1999 to 2009, McNabb was sacked 357 times. Now, this is where Jalen Hurts is a little farther up the list already. He's already sixth, and in a short time with the team, with 151. So this is a negative number that very possible you might see him getting, reaching the overall lead in that negative category. But those are your quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts is a good one, and you can expect to see him over the years moving up the list and actually almost having a good possibility of becoming the all-time leader in many of the Eagles categories. All right, let's look at the running backs. And again, this is interesting because the Eagles have been around since the 30s, and yet some of their numbers aren't eye-popping. You would think somebody would have stood out a little bit more, and that's the same in the rushing category. LeSean McCoy is the all-time leader in rushing yards. From 2009 to 2014, he ended up with 6,792 yards, just passing Wilbert Montgomery from 1977 to 1984, who had 6,538. Those are the only two players on the team that have rushed for over 6,000 yards in their career. I find that somewhat amazing when you think about the amount of years that the Eagles have been around. In fact, Wilbert Montgomery was the first one to break the record, which was held by Steve Van Buren from 1944 to 1951 with 5,860 yards. And then later on, Montgomery's record was broken by LeSean McCoy even 30 years later. So you just don't see it. It's interesting. Another interesting number on this list is that in number 6 place is Randall Cunningham with 4,482 yards. The leading quarterback, Donovan McNabb, as I was saying earlier, another running quarterback, had 3,249, and Jalen Hurts already has 3,133. So as far as quarterbacks go, again, here's a number where Jalen Hurts should pass both of these players. He'll definitely pass McNabb this year. He only is a little over 100 yards away from catching Donovan McNabb. Probably won't catch Randall Cunningham because he needs 1,300 yards to do that. But I think next season it's a very good possibility that Jalen Hurts becomes the number 1 rushing quarterback for the Eagles. So now when it comes to touchdowns, here's a record that Jalen Hurts will break, if not this year, next year. And it's about time, honestly. Steve Van Buren, like I said, from 1944 to 1951, holds the record for most rushing touchdowns with 69. So he set that record 74 years ago. Jalen Hurts is second already in his short time playing. He's second already with 55. He only needs 14 more to catch Steve Van Buren, 15 to pass him. I don't think he'll get it this year, but you definitely expect him to get it next year. So I expect to see a quarterback as the leading rushing touchdown leader for the Eagles at least sometime next year. Just shows you that tush push and how well the Eagles employ it. It's very impressive when it comes to the rushing touchdowns. And I say it's not that many. When Steve Van Buren's your leader since 1951 was 69, the all-time record is held by Emmitt Smith with 164. So it's quite a difference. There's only 9 players, though, with 100, but still, there's a lot of players that aren't the best players on their team that have more than the 69. But Jalen Hurts, he's going to shatter the record, and who knows where the record will end up. I could see it the way he's going currently. If he's already got 55 in 5 years, he'll hit the 100 touchdown mark, in another 5-6 years if he keeps up this pace. So very incredible running quarterback, at least, that he is. Some may question his passing ability and game management a little bit, but he is a very tough quarterback and very intent on being a good quarterback. So it's fun to watch him. All right, let's look at the wide receivers for the Eagles all time. And again, nobody over even 10,000, or even 9,000 yards as far as wide receivers go. Harold Carmichael, great player in his time from 1971 to 1983, ended his career with the Eagles with 8,978 yards. The only player for the Eagles over 7,500 yards in his career. So, again, one of those things you're just a little bit surprised, at least I am, that somebody doesn't have more yards. Second is Pete Retzlaff from 1956 to 66, who was 7,412. And then Deshaun Jackson, third, from 2008 to 2020, had 6,512 yards. So the numbers dropped incredibly fast. Top tight end was that Pete Retzlaff. As far as tight ends go, with the 7,412 yards, he was second all time. Zach Ertz, when he was on the team from 2013 to 2021, had 6,267. So he was the second best tight end as far as that goes. But really interesting, these numbers. Now, Dallas Goedert currently has 4,085 yards. And so I don't know how far he'll really move up the list. Now, A.J. Brown is right behind him already. He's been on the team since 2022. Has just over 4,000 yards with 4,031. And very possible, if he has a 1,000-yard season, he'll move all the way up to number 9. Give him 1,400 yards, he'll be even higher. So in a couple seasons, A.J. Brown's a guy to watch. Him and Devontae Smith. Devontae Smith started 1 year earlier with the Eagles, but is 20 yards behind him. So they're both just over 4,000 yards. So those two, will definitely be watching them as they climb up the list. Dallas Goedert's just ahead of them with 4,085, but I fully expect both Brown and Smith to pass him this year without a problem. So those two will be fun to watch along with the quarterback. And it really does have a good team to watch as far as people who are intent, whether they're intent or not. But my intention is to watch them as they move up their charts on the Eagles all-time list. Now, when we go to receptions, I should have started with them first. But as far as receptions go, it's Harold Carmichael again with 589 receptions in his career. Zach Ertz, as a tight end, was second with 579. And so only 10 receptions fewer. The big difference, obviously, is the yards per reception. Zach Ertz averaged 10.8. Harold Carmichael averaged 15.2. So big difference, which explains the vast disparity as far as yards go. So those are your top two. Now, again, when we're looking at Dallas Goedert, Devontae Smith, and who am I thinking of here? And A.J. Brown, they have quite a ways to go, actually. They just average a decent amount. A.J. Brown's averaging over 15 yards a catch. Devontae Smith is 13. But in this category, Dallas Goedert does have a lead as far as current players on the team with 349 receptions compared to Devontae Smith with 308. So I'm not sure that anybody's going to this season, as far as active players, catch Dallas Goedert in receptions. And then A.J. Brown's quite a ways down with 261. Of course, like I said, Devontae Smith started a year ahead of A.J. Brown, so he's got that lead on him. But I fully expect A.J. Brown to, I don't know if he'll catch him this year, but he'll definitely cut into the lead of both of those, both Goddard and Smith. So we'll watch that as the season goes along. So those are your, as far as receptions go. And then when we look at touchdowns, it's again Harold Carmichael with 79 touchdown receptions. That's a good number. Not an all-time number, but still a good number. And Tommy McDonald from 1957 to 1963 had 66 receptions. That's your second best as far as that goes. Only four, it's interesting, only four players with 60 or more, or even 50 or more. So fourth place, Mike Quick from 1982 to 1990 had 61. And then in fifth, Pete Retzlaff drops all the way down to 47. So currently, when you're looking at the current players, Devontae Smith is 16th with 27 touchdowns receiving. So we'll see how many he gets. I don't know. Maybe if he got 10, he'd move quite a ways up the list. He'd move up into the top 10 easy. We'll just see how that goes. A.J. Brown right behind him with 25. So just two difference. And then Dallas Goedert is third with 24. That's it. You know, it's impressive because it does make it difficult for a defense to cover this team. I mean, you got Jalen Hurts running in with touchdowns. Then you've got three different receivers who were pretty apt to catch a touchdown pass. So really makes it difficult for defenses when they're trying to stop the Eagles. So those are your wide receivers as far as that goes. All right, let's move on to the defense career-wise and see what we have there. When it comes to, let me get that up here for us. We'll start with interceptions. And the all-time leader as far as interceptions go is Victor Abayamiri from 2000 wait, hang on. That's not right. My bad. Eric Allen. I knew that wasn't right. Eric Allen from 1988 to 1994. Bill Bradley, 1969 to 1976. And Brian Dawkins from 1996 to 2008 all had 34 interceptions. Here's a name I didn't realize, but Herm Edwards, who I know more as a coach, was fourth with 33 interceptions in his career with the Eagles. Those are your top four. And again, as always, just about when it comes to interceptions, nobody current is usually anywhere near the top of the list. C.J. Gardner Johnson has 12. That's it. Not anywhere near the number of the rest of the team. So just a category that is so hard for anybody current because of the way the rules are to consistently put up enough interceptions season to season to break the record. I'm looking for somebody that's on the team this coming year, and I don't really. Darius Slade had, and he's not even on the team this coming year either. Darius Slade from last year had 9. So really, you're just starting from scratch. So unlike the offense where we have several players to watch and see how they do, there's really nobody for the Eagles to watch as far as interceptions go. Now, when we look at tackles for loss, let's look at that. Tackles for loss, get that category here real quick. Brandon Graham, 126 tackles for loss from 2010 to 2024. So just this past year, he broke the record held by Trent Cole from 2005 to 2014. Trent Cole had 124. So Brandon Graham was able to pass him by 2 tackles for loss. So pretty good for him to do that. Now, that's where the record stops because I don't see Graham as coming back this year. So we'll see who's the next player up as far as that category goes. Let me see what we got here. Current players. Let's see here real quick. You know what? I just didn't realize the turnover the Eagles had as far as defense goes this year. So it'll be interesting to see how the defense does this coming year when they get out there on the field. Well, I really don't see anybody anywhere near the top of the list. So this is another category where you're not going to see anybody break the record like you did last year. All right, we'll look at one more category as far as career defense goes, and that is sacks. And the great Reggie White from 1985 to 1992 had 124 sacks in his career with the Eagles. His career as a whole, he ended up with 198 sacks, which puts him second all-time, even whether it's unofficial or official record. He's second all-time. So very impressive. Trent Cole, again, from 2005 to 2014, had 85 and a half. Those were the top 2 as far as sacks goes. And then when we're looking at current players again, there's nobody. Brandon Graham, who's gone, he had racked up 76 and a half. He was 9 behind Trent Cole for second, but there's really nobody pushing Reggie White anytime soon. So we'll see what happens this year as far as anybody new coming out and playing for the Eagles on the defensive side. All right, so that is the Eagles from a career-wise number. Let's look at the Eagles in a single season and see sometimes you often see different numbers because of the fact that you're doing it only on a season and not a career basis. I do think, just had this thought, I have it regularly, but sometimes I think the career records are going to be hard to break because, except for maybe quarterbacks sometimes, because players play a contract, their rookie contract, maybe a second contract, and because of the money situation, they ship them off somewhere else, and they end up playing their career on 2 or more teams. It's just not as frequent that you see a player staying in with one team to set a career record. Now they'll set a career record overall with several teams, but to break a team record sometimes might be difficult. All right, so looking at the season stats, when it comes to the quarterbacks, only one quarterback, which is interesting, has thrown for over 4,000 yards in a single season. And that was Carson Wentz in 2019, threw for 4,039 yards. That's your best quarterback as far as yards go. Jalen Hurts, last year was his best year as far as passing goes. In 2023, he threw for 3,858 yards. This past season, in only 15 games, but the numbers were way down, even for 15 games. He threw for 2,903 yards, so way off. And I don't see that changing a lot. I mean, he probably hit 3,000 this year because he won't, except for injury, of course, he won't play just 15 games necessarily. So he should pass the 3,000-yard mark. But he's not a quarterback. When you have Saquon Barkley and you have Jalen Hurts himself, who runs a lot, I just don't see him passing for 4,000 yards. So it's likely that Carson Wentz's record could stand for a while longer as far as that goes. So when we're looking at Jalen Hurts with his 2,903 yards and comparing that to last season's quarterbacks, that put Jalen Hurts as 20th in the NFL as far as passing yards. Joe Burrow's was first with 4,918. So more, basically almost double, not quite double, but quite a bit more yards for him. And then when we're looking at touchdowns thrown by quarterbacks last season, again, a category where I don't see Jalen Hurts necessarily ever breaking the record, also held by Carson Wentz, but in a different year. In 2017, he had 33 touchdowns, which broke a record by Sonny Jurgensen, who in 1961 threw 32 touchdown passes. So that record stood for, 56 years before Carson Wentz broke it with 33 touchdown passes. When we're talking about Jalen Hurts, his best season, again, in 2023, he had 23 touchdown passes. This past season, he had 18. So again, he's not the kind of quarterback that's going to break the record for touchdown passes. Now, you combine the rushing touchdowns, you might have a different story, but even then it's going to be difficult. So again, when we're looking at the NFL as a whole in 2024, Joe Burrow had 43 touchdown passes with 18. Hurts was 20th in the NFL again. So right down there in the bottom third of the NFL as far as passing yards and touchdowns. Now, when it comes to interceptions, now, again, like I said, career-wise, Jalen Hurts had a number of 2% that he threw for interceptions. Last season, he threw interceptions at a rate of 1.4, so even lower. So he had 18 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. It's a good ratio, better than 3-1. As far as the Eagles all time, it's Sonny Jurgensen has top 2 spots. 1962, he threw for 26 interceptions. 26 interceptions. I'll get that right. And 22 touchdowns. Not a ratio you want. You always want touchdowns to be a bigger number than the interceptions, but not the case for him. So this is a category where you don't see Jalen Hurts. He's 26th on the list all time with his worst season in 2023 again. When he threw for those 3,800 plus yards, he had 15 interceptions. And he threw for quite a double the rate of interceptions that he did in this past season. So he really improved. In 2023, he threw interceptions at a 2.8% rate. 2024, it was a 1.4. So he cut that number in half. So that's an improvement. Though the yards went down, he didn't have as many turnovers. He went from 15 interceptions to 5. So, throw for more yards, but if you're going to have 10 more turnovers, that hurts your team. So really, it's an interesting number depending on how you want to look at it. But obviously the Eagles have a good quarterback in Jalen Hurts. Now, when it comes to being sacked, Randall Cunningham, as I told you, was the leader all time. He's also the leader when it comes to being sacked. He was sacked 72 times in 1986 to set the record for the team. 72 times. That's good enough to be second all-time in the NFL, only behind David Carr, who was sacked 76 times. So not the kind of number you want to see yourself. Randall Cunningham, in fact, is number 10 all-time as well. He had 60 times he was sacked. So he's on this list of all-time number of sacks being sacked in the NFL's history. lucky for him that you also have David Carr on the list, who was sacked twice. He's also on this list, but even higher on the list. He's number 1 all time, and David Carr also has the number 3 most times sacked. So only quarterback to be sacked more often than Randall Cunningham. And again, not a number you want to see. And for a running quarterback, Jalen Hurts, not bad. 38 times he was sacked, was the most he's ever been sacked. So that's a good number. I'm looking to see what year that was. But 38 times. And let me see here. 38 times. Where did he go? I passed him right by here. Oh, he's 18th spot in 2022. So that's the worst he's ever had. So he does pretty well as far as the sacks go. This past season, he was sacked 38 times as well. So that's a lot of times, but it pales half the amount of times that David Carr was sacked. And when you're looking at the total for the NFL past season, again, here we have another rookie quarterback from this past season in Caleb Williams, who was sacked 68 times, to put him on the list right there with David Carr for 3rd all time. So Caleb Williams will be looking for a better offensive line and a better scheme with a new coach and everything to not be sacked so many times this next season coming up. Now, Jalen Hurts was 11th with his 38 sacks. He did come in 11th as far as this category goes, but really not quite half of what Caleb Williams had. And for the amount of running around Jalen Hurts does, it's a pretty good number. And he's such a strong quarterback that, it's really not bad. Going back to the quarterbacks and interceptions this past season, as I said, Jalen Hurts was only sacked 16 times. I'm sorry. Let me back up. I'm doing too much at one time. Jalen Hurts was sacked 5 times last season. So that's not bad. Baker Mayfield, Kirk Cousins, and Geno Smith were sacked. Well, let me back up again. Baker Mayfield for Tampa, Kirk Cousins for Atlanta were both sacked 16 times. So they were intercepted 16 times. I'm sorry. I barely got any sleep. This is a little sidebar here. Barely got any sleep for some personal things dealing with my dad that we had to take care of, medical things, and hopefully everything goes well, and I think it will. But it's been a long day, but I wanted to get this podcast out. So pardon me for some of the goofs here. But Kirk Cousins, like I said, was tied with Mayfield, except that Kirk Cousins only played 14 games to get his 16 interceptions. So obviously he finishes out the season with 17 interceptions. 17 games. He's probably going to have way more than 16 interceptions. So those are your quarterbacks as far as season goes and the records in the passing department. So now let's look at the rushing totals. So for the Eagles, obviously, we have a new record that was set just this past season by Saquon Barkley. Broke LeSean McCoy's record. Barkley this past season had 2,005 yards, which is now the all-time highest rushing yards total for the Eagles. LeSean McCoy in 2013 had 1,607 yards. So didn't take Barkley but one season to break the record held by McCoy. That'll be difficult. Barkley could do it. If you've been listening to any other podcast talking about Barkley and say where to pick him in fantasy football, a lot of people were hesitant to pick him first because it's very difficult for a running back to have two excellent seasons back to back. So we'll see how that goes. I mean, he's had enough difficulty earlier in his career that it'd be nice for the Barkley and, of course, the Eagles if Barkley can stay healthy 2 years in a row. So with that 2,005 yards that Barkley had, not only did he led the NFL, obviously, with that number just above Derrick Henry, but also it put him 8th on the all-time list as far as rushing yards go with his 2,005. There's only been 8 players to rush for over 2,000 yards. So Barkley just squeezed out this past season his 2,000 yards. So good for him. So we'll see how he does. But like I said, McCoy had just over 1,600 yards. So even if, obviously if Barkley rushes for 1,600 yards again next season, that's a great season. So it's possible Barkley will have the number 1 and 2 spots by the time this 2025 season ends. Now, when it comes to rushing touchdowns, LeSean McCoy in 2011 had 17 rushing touchdowns. And then you have Steve Van Buren from 1945 and Jalen Hurts from 2023 with 15 rushing touchdowns. That's impressive. So LeSean McCoy broke Van Buren's record from 1945. He broke it in 2011. So you're talking about 66 years it took for somebody to beat Van Buren's 1945 record. And again, this is one of the reasons I was saving the NFC. For me, it's just fascinating to see how some of these records stand for so long sometimes. Jalen Hurts already has the 3rd, 4th, and 8th spot in the top 10. So, and I'm sure as far as rushing touchdowns go, and if things stay the same, and I would think they would, I expect to see him have another top 10 rushing total as far as touchdowns go this season. And we'll just see where he ends up with those rushing touchdowns. When we're looking at the NFL as a whole, and I'll get that number here for us. When we're looking at the NFL as a whole and it comes to rushing touchdowns, this is a category. Barkley had 13, so not bad, but the quarterback beat him out with rushing touchdowns. Barkley is 5th all time as far as rushing touchdowns go for the Eagles. But last season, Derrick Henry for Baltimore, Jahmyr Gibbs for Detroit, and James Cook for Buffalo all had 16 rushing touchdowns to lead the NFL. So those are your top 3 in the NFL as far as rushing touchdowns go. All right, let's look at the receivers and see how they did this past season. And just as Burrows did with the quarterbacks, Jamar Chase is going to do with the wide receivers. So Cincinnati had a couple of really great players there. This is an interesting category. One of those things where a tight end is the all-time leader in receptions for the team, and that's Zach Ertz. In 2018, had 116 receptions. A.J. Brown, second, in 2023, had 106 receptions. The only 2 receivers, one tight end, one wide receiver, to break the 100 reception mark. So that is interesting. In all these years, only 2 receivers have been able to break 100 receptions. This past season, nobody was close. Devontae Smith had 68. A.J. Brown had 67. Those are your top 2. And what makes it interesting, again, about the 100 receptions is when you look at the NFL this past season, 10 players in the NFL last season alone had 100 or more receptions, led by Jamar Chase with 127. So just an incredible difference when it comes to receiving. So even though, and again, when you look at the quarterback who didn't throw for that many yards, I guess it's to be expected that no one's going to have a ton of receptions. Now, when you're looking at yards all time, this is different. This is where A.J. Brown stands out. Not this past year, but in 2022, he had 1,496 yards to set the record for the Eagles as far as most yards receiving in a season. So that's the record. He has the number 2 total as well with just a little bit less, 40 yards less with 1,456, which happened to be the season he had 106 receptions. So the big difference between those 2 years, when A.J. Brown set the record, he only had 88 receptions, but he had 17 yards per reception. In 2023, A.J. Brown had 106 receptions, but he only averaged 13.7 yards. So more than 3 yards less per reception, which makes up for the difference. And this past season, A.J. Brown was able to break the 1,000-yard mark with 1,079 to lead the team. He averaged over 16 yards of reception, so that's really good. And again, like I was saying, with Burrow, Chase led the NFL with 1,708 yards. And there was a multitude of wide receivers. In fact, 24 who had 1,000 or more yards this past season, with A.J. Brown coming in at 17th in the NFL as far as yards go. So 1,000 yards, obviously, with 17 games is not the same as it used to be with either 16 or 14 games seasons. So, but it's still a number that, wide receivers are always working to get to. Now, when it comes to touchdowns receiving, this is where Terrell Owens pops up. Terrell Owens in 2004 had 14 touchdown receptions to lead the Eagles. He broke a record that had been held first by Mike Quick in 1983 and by Tommy McDonald twice in 1960 and 61 with 13 each. So it had been a record that had been around for quite a year, 44 years before it was broken by Terrell Owens with his 14. This past season, Devontae Smith had 8 touchdowns receiving. A.J. Brown had 7. So quite a bit of difference. And then when we're looking at the NFL as a whole, again, Jamar Chase, 17 touchdowns receiving. But with 8, Devontae Smith pulled into the 13th spot in the NFL this past season. Like I was mentioning, with all these stars that the Eagles have on offense as far as setting Eagles records, I mean, A.J. Brown is going to catch Dallas Goedert because he had 600 more yards. He had 25 more receptions. He had 5 more touchdowns. So him and Devontae Smith are going to pass Dallas Goedert in most of the categories. It might take a little longer in the receptions, but the yards-wise, they're going to blow right by him, and touchdowns as well. They've already caught him, basically, but they're going to put a lot of distance between them. So those are your top receivers, your top tight end, and as I said, was Zach Ertz, and then Dallas Goedert also, as far as different categories go. But those are the top 2 tight ends for the Eagles. All right, let's look at the defense and see some of the numbers there for the team. So when we're looking at, we'll start again as we do with interceptions. Bill Bradley in 1971 had 11 interceptions in a season to set the record. That's a good amount of interceptions in a single season. One of the better ones you'll see, in fact. And a guy named Bill Bradley was another one in 1955 for Bowell, 1972 for Bill Bradley. They had 9 interceptions. Now, this past season, C.J. Gardner-Johnson had 6 to lead the team, with Reed Blankenship coming in second with 4. The only 2 that had more than 1. So that's something we're looking at. Now, Blankenship is back, playing his position, but Gardner-Johnson isn't. So we'll see how Blankenship does. But those were your top 2 when it comes to interceptions. And as I said, Bill Bradley holds the record with 11. When it comes to the NFL as a whole in interceptions, we have Kirby Joseph from Detroit had 9. A good number. He would have tied for second all time with the Eagles, but he plays for the Detroit Lions. He had 9 to lead the NFL. Xavier McKinney was second with his 8, and then you had C.J. Gardner-Johnson third in the NFL last season with his 6. So impressive. And Blankenship was 10th with his 4. So those are some good numbers as far as interceptions go, but not quite enough, obviously, to hit the all-time list. When it comes for tackles for loss, the all-time record is held by Hugh Douglas. He holds actually the top 2 spots. In 2000, he had 21 tackles for loss, and in 2002, he had 20 tackles for loss. So those are your top 2 numbers as far as the Eagles go. And it's quite a ways from being in the top of the list altogether as far as the NFL goes. This past season, Jalen Carter had 12 tackles for loss to lead the Eagles, and he'll be back this next season. Zach Bowen had 11. Those are the top 2 tackle for loss leaders last year. And when you're comparing that to the entire NFL, it's a little bit to be desired as far as that goes. Myles Garrett, who's obviously a great player, and the top 3 players really are too, but Myles Garrett for Cleveland had 22 tackles for loss, so quite a bit more. Trey Hendrickson for Cincinnati and T.J. Watt for Pittsburgh had 19 apiece. So a big difference when it comes to that. And then when you're looking at sacks this past season, again, nobody really was standing out too much. Josh Sweat had 8 sacks this past season to lead the Eagles. So again, a lot to be desired. Nolan Smith, he had 6.5. So nobody was really standing out in that category. And when you're looking at the entire NFL as far as sacks go this past season, well, it was Trey Hendrickson with 17.5. Just switching spots with Myles Garrett as far as tackles for loss went, with Myles Garrett being the leader, Trey Hendrickson being second. This time, Myles Garrett second in sacks. He had 14 in the NFL. So with only 8, quite a ways down the list. And nowhere near the all-time list for the Eagles. All-time, Reggie White in 1987 had 21 sacks in a single season. Clyde Smith had 19 sacks in a season in 1992. So now Reggie White with his 21 sacks on the unofficial list, he's 11th all-time. The unofficial list goes back to 1960, and it runs itself up to 1982, actually 1981. The official list starts in 1982. And if you want to know why this is, go back to my previous podcast where I talked about this very topic, along with the AAFC merger as far as their records go with the NFL. I talked about those two in a single podcast. So go and listen to that, and you'll see why there's a distinction as far as sacks go. But when it comes to the official list, Reggie White's 6th, tied for 6th all time. And as I said, tied for 11th all time if you go with the unofficial list, which I think should be the official list, but that's just my own opinion. So Reggie White was a great player, just an incredible defender. All right, so that wraps it up for the Eagles. Great team. It'll be very interesting to see, and I fully expect them to come out first again in their division. Whether they can make it to the Super Bowl, we'll see. There's a couple of other good teams in the NFC that they're going to have to face ultimately to make it to the Super Bowl. But they, at least on the offense and the style of offense they have, they're incredible. We'll see how their defense is this year and see where they end up. Next up is the up-and-coming Washington Commanders, who, honestly, I think in this division will be the only team that could possibly challenge the Eagles. We'll see how they do. Because I don't expect the Cowboys, and especially the Giants, to be serious contenders. They might have better teams, but they're not going to. I just don't see how they could be good enough to beat the Eagles. But stick around as I continue through the NFC and also the other podcasts I'm going to be putting out on different topics that involve the statistics of the NFL. All right. So, and if you're interested in the AFC teams, if you missed those, go back and you can hear your favorite AFC team and some stats about them. Appreciate you listening. And if you want to contact me, you can catch me on Facebook, X, or Instagram at Just the Stats NFL. Send me a message. It's great. I'll get back to you. Appreciate again all of you who are listening to this podcast, and I hope you enjoyed it. That's a wrap for this episode of Just the Stats NFL. So until next time, I'm out.